Welcome to Season 2 of the Crypto Pulse podcast, your ultimate guide to the world of crypto, Bitcoin, and world economics. We're here to guide you through the crypto universe with thought-provoking topics, in-depth knowledge, and information to help you make informed decisions. We'll also be interviewing some of the best minds in the industry, such as CEOs of crypto projects, traders, economists, authors, and development teams from around the globe. And now for the episode.
Hello and welcome back to the Crypto Pulse podcast for another one of our incredible guest interviews. Now today I had the amazing opportunity to sit down with the president of Coinfund, Chris Perkins. Chris has a really interesting background from transitioning from the US Marine Corps to the world of finance, and I'm super thankful for him to take the time out of his busy schedule to talk with me. Now I flew solo on this one because Ben couldn't unfortunately make the recording, but it's still an incredibly informative listen, and I think you'll all love it. I hope you enjoy. Chris, thanks so much for jumping on and chatting to me today. Welcome to the Crypto Pulse podcast. We're really excited to have you on the show. Before we kick off, for some of the listeners that don't know too much about you, maybe you could give us a little bit of your personal background and how you got into the crypto space, because I've done quite a lot of research and there's lots I want to ask you about your past, but maybe you could just kind of give a few minutes of an introduction and give people some context.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. My background is a little different, I guess, than a lot of people in crypto. I started off in the United States Marine Corps, served for 9 years. I was in Iraq, saw a ton of combat in the city of Ramadi, a little bit in Fallujah, then spent about 7 months in Ramadi, where I learned what it's like to get shot at. From there, I came back to the States, and I ended up landing a job at Lehman Brothers, where I got into derivatives, boss quit after 18 months, took over our Derivatives Prime Brokerage business. And then I saw the financial world almost come to an end. Back in 2008 with the global financial crisis, I was sitting there on the ground floor of Lehman. My trades went bankrupt. Next day, I got a call from Citi. They asked me if I wanted a job. I asked them what kind of package. They said it's a great package. It's called a job. So got on the train, started working there, cleaned up my own mess. And then I was asked to take charge of a business as we took the $700 trillion derivatives industry from unregulated to regulated. My regulator was a guy named Gary Gensler, who now serves as the chairman of the SEC. Yeah. And after that, I believe it was Christian Carlo, who we brought onto our advisory board. And so worked and built that business from the ground up as a founder, really. I had a bank, but I was a founder. Then in 2018, asked to take charge of something called our Foreign Exchange Prime Brokerage business. They asked me to look at it, and I looked at it, and they said, will you take it? And I said, well, I guess I have to take it. And the day I took charge of that, Bloomberg reported a $180 million loss. So again, 12 regulators, 9 months later, we restored that to a top business. And then by the time I left traditional finance, I was running our global futures business. So I had about 725 direct and indirect reports. So it was a $500 million business. But I decided to walk away from it all because I just could not stop thinking about what was happening, the incredible innovation that was happening in the crypto space. I was a degen by nights and weekends, as many people are. They still are. I know there's plenty of people on the trading desk today that are going home at night and goofing around and learning and exploring. I had this epiphany. I'm like, gosh, this technology is so transformative, so much so people don't even realize how big it is and it's going to be. And I started looking at history. I started looking at what happens when you fundamentally innovate on this thing we call the ledger, which sits at the heart of civilization. Big things happen, right? And so I started looking at the space in 2016, thought about becoming a founder, but I was building my businesses at the time. Ultimately, I couldn't take it anymore, and I started scanning the landscape. And ultimately, after massive due diligence, I landed at Coinfund, which has been just an incredible, incredible journey with incredible people. I'm loving every second of it. And being this close to innovation, there's nothing like it.
You've had such a diverse career, from being in the military right the way through to working various facets of traditional finance. What are some of the things that you've learned in your past professions that you've brought into the position that you're in now?
Yeah, the Marine Corps is an incredible place, not just for I mean, it teaches you to lead for sure, and it also teaches you a bias for action. I always say that. Like they used to always teach us a poor decision executed well is better than no decision at all.
I love
And
that.
having that bias for action and identifying gaps and then closing those gaps, right? It's also when you work in the military and you're thrust into very, very dynamic environments. Like Iraq was probably the most complex dynamic environment you could even fathom. You really need to rely on creativity, and people don't understand this. Like when you're subject to certain rules of engagement and you're subject to certain major challenges, you really have to be creative. And even in combat, how do you outthink your enemies, the people that are trying to kill you? It takes a lot of creativity. So like bias for action is one, creativity is another that I had to rely on. And then of course, like risk management, right? We take a lot of risk in the military, but you always have to think about how you mitigate that risk. And having that risk management mindset has been very, very, whether you're risk taking, you always need to think about how to take risk and how to manage risk and take good risk, right? That was always something that was on my mind. But gosh, there's a million lessons that you learn. Perhaps the most important thing is perspective, right? You learn, I've lost many, many friends, and it gives you a perspective, and it imbues me with this sense of massive impatience, because, having breakfast one day with a dear friend, the next day he's gone. Like, we don't have much time. And so, like, I say the last thing that I'm imbued with is incredible impatience to do as much as possible.
I feel that impatience myself as a person that's built some businesses, and I'm 39 this year. My 40th will be coming soon, and you realize very soon that actually you've lived a lot of your life, and the best parts of your life are in front of you. But it does create a sense of urgency and a sense of not just doing something that is going to be exciting or going to keep you happy, but something that's meaningful and fulfilling. So I don't know how, I would imagine you agree to that to some extent, if not all of it. But what was it about Web3 and crypto that really made you feel that you wanted to get into this space?
Yeah, you're touching on it, Kevin. A sense of purpose is massive, right? Like a lot of, and I'm doing, I've done a lot with the veterans community, and a lot of veterans lose their way because they lose that sense of purpose. One of the things that attracted to me most about Web3 was, we can change the world with this technology. I remember with my last meeting with Jake Brugman, we had a dinner before we agreed that I was going to take this job and move forward and partner. He's like, I'm here to change the world. And I'm like, you know what? That's why I'm here. And I think, I was astounded by the innovation. I was attracted to it. But when you step back and you look at how we can fundamentally change the world by creating a more inclusive environment where we can empower creators and artists, it's very much aligns with my values. And it gave me that sense of purpose that really powers me every day to work closely with founders, to help them build their business, to disrupt where we need to disrupt, and to leverage my unique experience to help them be successful.
I'm with you on that. What excites me most, I think, is the decentralization of power in, like, compared to traditional businesses, and the quality of opportunity specifically that it gives other people in other parts of the world to be part of this community, like entrepreneurs, devs. And a lot of these blockchains that people can build on are permissionless. They can just get on and do it, and you can't necessarily do that in traditional tech because you need all these centralized cloud services, all these centralized software services. So I'm completely with you on that. So what attracted you to Coinfund specifically, and what are they doing that you think is going to change the world and is meaningful to you?
Yeah, look, anytime you take a job or look at what you're doing in your life, it's all about people. As much as we focus on technology, people create technology. And so as I got to know the Coinfund team, look, this is they started in 2015. They are as crypto native as it gets. Some of the earliest adopters in the world outside of Bitcoin, some of the first adopters in the NFT space, people who know the communities better than anyone, and like just a record of success in all of their endeavors. thought leaders in every sense of the word, our values aligned. And I knew that I had a very unique role to play because I bring a diverse perspective. And we're also a very diverse fund, right? We've got like 30% women, which, we're trying to improve. We have good racial and gender diversity, but like, I knew that I could add a perspective that they didn't have, and I could really help them scale this beautiful thing that they've started. And it really starts and ends with the people. Look, we've got backgrounds in computer science, mathematics, venture, PE, you name it, and just being part of really, really being surrounded by really intelligent people that make me better. That's what it is.
I love that. So maybe for some of our listeners that don't know too much about Coinfund, what's its main purpose in the market? What's its main objectives and what does it do?
Yeah, so we have a number of different strategies. We have venture strategies. We have seed strategies. We just announced a venture strategy yesterday. And we also have a liquid strategy. So at the end of the day, what we try to do is identify the best founders in the world focused on Web3 verticals, partnering with them to build their company. And we'll look at a variety of different themes look, we're very known in our NFT space. We don't buy and sell JPEGs in our strategies. But what we do is we will look at tooling across, we think that the NFT world is about to really explode, not just for JPEGs, but you can take anything that's non-fungible today and put it into the internet and introduce value. So there's an incredible amount of tooling around there. Infrastructure is just going to be another massive theme in our space. Cross-chain interoperability. One of the things that we struggle with in Web3 is user experience. And we're seeing an incredible amount of development coming in, working on everything from privacy, which I think we should talk about, to like I said, cross-chain interoperability, messaging. Just really, as time goes on, I think these developers, and some of which with Web2 backgrounds, will really enhance and make that experience more seamless. So we do a lot in the infrastructure space. DAOs, you talked about community formation, feeding into this innately human, tribal need to form groups. DAOs are super interesting. So whether we partner with DAOs directly, invest in tooling, look at tooling, et cetera. DeFi, another incredibly fascinating theme, especially with my background in finance. I think DeFi is really, we had DeFi summers come back a little bit, but I think we haven't even crossed the starting line yet with DeFi. It's going to be amazing. Then gaming. I think gaming is another vertical that is super exciting. We need to have better games for sure, but the concepts that are coming out right now are just incredible. And then we'll look at various themes. We're looking at the intersection of AI and blockchain. I mean, incredibly fascinating theme. We'll look at ESG, right? If you look at two themes in traditional finance, hey, how am I going to figure out this crypto thing? Oh my gosh, I need to figure out ESG. When those two things align, it's pretty fascinating. So we'll look at there. And then overall things like convergence, like how are these, we talk about TradFi and crypto, eventually it's just going to be Fi, right? And we look at, all different things like regenerative finance. We do tons of things there. So the verticals are so fascinating, and we have experts who look across them.
So in terms of a venture fund, how does this work? So some of our listeners would have heard about private equity and VCs, and I'm familiar with it to a certain extent in traditional business setups. But do projects apply to you for funding, or do you go out to projects you're interested in, or is it a mixture of both? And then how do you decide what's a good fit for Coinfund and a good investment?
Our strategies, what we do is we're looking for strategies that meet certain underwriting standards for our partners. And we go out and we seek to source them through many different means. Ultimately, we're looking for the best founders in the world, and we will meet them in various venues, conferences or other places, and we leverage our network or other founders. One of the things we really believe in as a differentiator is putting our founders first, right? So with venture, a good venture firm doesn't just like show up, write a check, and then ride off into the sunset and wish for the best. We'd really like to put our hands on and leverage all these things I talked about around having, we have a head of talent now who will help them identify, it's all about people, right? So identifying top talent for them. Our head of marketing who will help them think through how they can go to market and differentiate their strategy. We'll help on the operational side of things. And so we help cultivate them with our portfolio growth by really trying to put the founder first. A lot of people may say it, we really mean it. It's why we're here, and it really reflects our values. So we source through a variety of means, and then we'll partner with that founder. We'll think through their business model, and if we have a differentiated way to add value and help them scale, we will we'll work with them and navigate what we call our IC, our investment process. And it's a very, very detailed process where we look at everything across the board, from the accessible market to the traits of the founder. We'll even look at it through an ESG lens. Are they thinking about this the right way? And then we will derive a thesis, and then we'll decide to partner with a portfolio or not. But it's a very detailed, intense process, and we love doing it.
I want to change up the conversation slightly because I want to get your perspective on adoption in the market. And you mentioned a couple of things previously. You mentioned privacy is something we should talk about, which we can do that now if you think it's a good place to do it. And I also want to talk a little bit about DAOs as well, and actually how a DAO can function with a traditional type of business. So let's cover privacy first, because there's a lot to discuss on that, I think.
Yeah. So we recently saw action by OFAC with two real initiatives. One is Blender, and then the other one is Tornado Cash.
Right.
The two are separate and distinct in my mind. Blender was very centralized, it's a centralized company, and I think it was not out of the norm for OFAC to adjudicate and to decide that for based on their criteria that they needed to sanction Blender. What got interesting was when they launched sanctions against Tornado Cash, which is a protocol, decentralized protocol, effectively sanctioning code, really, what many people think is for the first time. When I speak to Treasury officials and try to get their take on it, they feel as though it's the right thing for them to do because there was a ton of money that was our crypto that was mixed by Lazarus Group and the North Koreans, and that's clearly against national security interests. They feel as though they feel as though they have the legal backing to do it, and I think I'm looking at this through kind of like a unique lens because, look, my sister was impacted in 9/11. I've had many friends that have been killed by terrorists, and I really don't want them to, be funded. And so I come in with a very, I'm very supportive of preventing money from going to terrorists. And I think uniformly that most folks who operate in this industry agree. They're like, yeah, that's not a good thing. The challenge is the means upon which OFAC is currently sanctioning, and is it appropriate to sanction code itself? And how does that, when you look at in the United States, various amendments, whether it's the Fourth Amendment or, even the First Amendment, does that reconcile? And my sense is that will play out in the courts, and I'm sure that there will be thoughtful discussion around it. My ultimate takeaway, however, is that I don't see this as black and white. I don't see you're either on the side of OFAC or you're on the side of personal liberty. I think we can have both, and I think we can have both through technology. I think to the extent that a person transacts with a sanctioned actor, terrorist or a country or an entity that they really shouldn't be transacting with, you should be held accountable. Now, does that mean that it's appropriate to sanction code? I'm very much more in favor of sanctioning individuals who are doing the wrong thing. And I do believe that technology can solve for this. I mean, we're seeing a ton of different initiatives that provide a means to do the OFAC sanctions, AML, KYC checks, even through like a zero knowledge type of way where we can create ecosystems, or you can effectively find ways to leverage NFTs within wallets that have been their KYC'd and therefore can represent that they are not an OFAC recipient. And so I would say that, like everything else in Web3, the user experience needs to be improved. And I do think we can balance, this disconnect through privacy-enhanced technologies and privacy-enhancing technologies that can do both. And so, like that's my hope and dream. And I'm seeing a number of projects in the space emerge, and I'm hopeful that ends up solving this conundrum.
It's a really interesting situation. Now, we covered this on our weekly show last Saturday. Actually, we spoke about the Tornado Cash situation. There's been a lot of talk of it on Twitter about open source code being sanctioned, and I just thought it was real overreach, and I just thought it was way too much. However, I do understand that something needs to be done to make sure that these groups of reprehensible individuals don't have the facility to wash funds or do anything that they shouldn't do that puts the security of people and people's lives at risk. So I think the regulators have got a real tough job. And I think one of the things, we spoke to Brett Harrison of FTX not so long ago, actually, and he said that some of the biggest problems that these regulators have is the resource and the knowledge. And it's up to companies like FTX and some of these other big players to start working with regulators and to create framework that's sensible, because the regulators aren't just going to say, hey, it's a free market, do what you want. But we also can't push back too hard at them, and because then they'll be like, right, we're just going to throw the book at everything and everyone. And it's like, this is how we're going to do it. So are you guys, you mentioned Gary Gensler, actually, how much input are you having on the regulatory framework in the States, and how much do they ask you for input as well, I guess is probably a good question.
Yeah, I think people may be surprised by this answer. I speak to the regulators all the time. And
really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I've been to Congress multiple times. I testified in front of Congress. I'm kind of excited about the dialogue that's happening, to be honest with you. When I testified and when I go to Washington, D.C. and I talk to congressional staff, I can't tell if they're Democrats or Republicans. They're earnestly asking for advice, guidance, education, and thought. These are really, really hard challenges. They have approached me and others like me saying, we don't know the right answer here. Help us think through it. And so the dialogue that I've had has been very, very constructive. And I've seen that not only at the legislative side of things, but also with the regulatory side of things. Very, very strong dialogue. I come from a CFTC background, so I've spoken to a number of the different commissioners, and they want to get it right. And I was also very encouraged by President Biden's executive order. And if you step back and you zoom out, sometimes we get too focused on the here and now. But if you zoom out, a few years ago, wasn't many people weren't sure if crypto was going to make it, right? It was associated with the Silk Road and it was bad. That dialogue and narrative is completely changed. And I think based on a lot of the investment in education, a lot of industry players have been making, if you look at the president's executive order, he talks about responsible innovation, right? And so I'm seeing this theme get repeated. I had lunch with Economic Secretary of the Treasury in the UK, banging his hand on the table saying, we need to differentiate in this country because if we don't capitalize on this technology, we will be left behind. And so I'm seeing this material difference in outlook. Now, do they get it right all the time? Probably not. There'll be some tweaking. I will also tell you that my heart goes out in a way to the regulators, because regulators' job is to enforce law. And right now, in many cases, we lack the policy and the lawmaking that helps inform their regulation. And so, I've been trying to focus my advocacy wherever possible at the policy level so that, and it's so important for our entrepreneurs. Remember how I said a bad decision executed well is better than no decision at all, right? If we have guardrails, right? If we know the rules and we have the sandbox, it gives our entrepreneurs the ability, transparency and predictability are key outcomes here. If they have those two things, they can build and we can help them build. But right now there's a little bit of problem, where we're not really sure where the boundary lies, and there's material differences in jurisdiction, whether you're SEC or CFTC regulated. So, it's going to take some time. We're heavily engaged, and thus far I've been very impressed with the dialogue.
That's really great to hear, and it's good to speak to somebody like yourself that's at the sharp end and actually talking to these people rather than reading stuff on Twitter or wherever else it is. And it's very, very divisive. It's like, regulators do something bad, they're evil and are preventing progress, or like regulators stop crime and they're amazing. It's like all we read is clickbait stuff, and we don't actually really get the truth from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
I will tell you that for the most part, they want to get it right. I'm not going to tell you that they're going to get it right. And I don't think they would say that they would necessarily all the time either. But if we start with this concept of responsible innovation, and that's what their goal is to achieve, I think they'll continue to listen to industry participants. And we have to invest, right? It's not always easy to spend your time to educate, but we owe it to ourselves. Look, a small change right now at the policy level, if you just make a small little change, it has massive downstream consequences for our entire ecosystem and all of our founders. And so I think it makes sense for us to continue to invest at the policy level, particularly now.
Agreed. So at the moment, crypto and specifically Bitcoin is very much at the end of the risk curve. So in traditional markets at the minute, we're seeing there's sell-offs in crypto. We're definitely in a bear market. And that's really being compounded by the macroeconomic climate. The original sort of thesis was that Bitcoin would be the hedge against inflation. Now, it certainly hasn't been a safe haven over the last year or so. What do you think needs to happen with, I'm going to say that Web3 and crypto, but let's talk specifically about Bitcoin. What do you think needs to happen for some kind of level of institutional adoption and for these institutions and for pension funds and things to start to really believe that this is a non-inflationary asset?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would rather talk about the entirety of crypto because it's hard to look through a singular lens. The thing that Bitcoin has going for it and I would say Ethereum at this point, is that it is a commodity under the U.S. law right now, so the regulation is clear, right? So you saw BlackRock just launch a Bitcoin product. Why? I think one of the reasons, and they said, well, it's the oldest, it's got the best historic back data from a risk perspective, but also the regulation is crystal clear, right? If you look at crypto right now, as opposed to other asset classes, there are three macro tailwinds that the other asset classes just don't have. The first is that regulatory de-risking we just talked about, right? So we're going from regulation is being clarified. We have bills going through Congress and other governments. And so that will de-risk us because now we know the box upon which we can build, right? Big theme. The second theme, institutional adoption. I mean, this is happening in real time. Like BlackRock is an obvious example most recently, but I just got off the phone with another major asset manager and they're talking about launching 7 strategies this year. Now, the two are very much correlated because the more regulatory de-risking you have, the more institutional adoption you will have as well. I will also tell you that when I was in traditional finance in 2017, my phone was ringing off the hook. People saying, get me into this market, Chris. And I'd say, are you speaking for yourself or for your fund? And they say, well, I'm speaking for myself. My fund would never touch this stuff. Okay. Totally not the case anymore, right? Every single asset manager, every single allocator, major one at least I'm talking about, they all form working groups. They are trying to figure this out, and they're all trying to get into this space. And so you're seeing a massive amount of institutional adoption happening. BlackRock was one name. You're going to see a proliferation of other announcements like this. The third major theme that we're seeing in our space that you're not seeing in other spaces is innovation, product innovation. In my seat in the venture side, I see new products coming to market every single day. And the amount of building that's happening does not compare to other asset classes or other parts of finance. And so those three themes, I personally see this like tsunami of institutional adoption coming into our space. Maybe we saw Bitcoin, very excited what happens after the merge. We're going to have a brand new, I think, landscape. You're going to have this ETH staking rate, which I think is going to form a really interesting benchmark. And I can't wait to see the products that are built off of and around it. It's going to be fascinating. And that will further de-risk. I think the ESG narrative has held a couple of folks a little bit off of Bitcoin. Look, major institutions, BlackRock being one of them, two major, like ESG is a major theme. And so we're also looking at interesting innovations where you can help offset some of your carbon. I think ETH move to proof of stake will help with the ESG narrative as well, and also facilitate incremental institutional adoption.
Really, this is going to be the next phase. I feel like I'm at the start of the dot-com boom again, really, where there's just going to be so much innovation, and we get this thing will just like trickle along, and then all of a sudden we'll just see this incredible hockey stick growth, which I think is going to solve a lot of problems with the economy. I think that this is such a huge growth area, and I think it gives millennials and Gen Z a real chance to make businesses and create something for themselves, but also to be able to collaborate in ways that we haven't been able to do before. So what would your advice be to anybody that's looking to build in Web3? What makes a good project? What would you say to them if somebody said, right, I want to start something? What should they do?
Yeah, I think the first part of starting something is understanding which problem you're trying to solve, right? There is so much that's broken out there. There are so many things that are inefficient, whether it's the use of intermediaries throughout the financial system. But I mean, there are, when you look about what this technology allows us to do, permissionless title transfer, the elimination of intermediaries, and then some. First, find a problem. Make sure that problem is big enough, right? And a problem that you can really, really scale and change the world. And then, you need to go out and find people. I keep talking about people. Find founders, fellow founders that complement your skill set, give you a deliver qualities and talents that you don't have, someone who complements you. And then together, look to solve that problem. And you always need to continue to listen because problems change. And so if you're a good listener, you can see gaps and then you close those gaps with people. That's what I look for.
So if anyone's listening to this, take that advice on board. Yesterday, we actually interviewed Gwen from B&B Chain, and we kind of have been asking the same question to a lot of people that are involved with new builders in this space, and everyone gives a slightly different answer, which I think's really cool. What do you think needs to be done to see mainstream adoption of Web3? So when people are building stuff, what I get frustrated about is a lot of people are talking about the tech, and there's a lot of talk on Twitter and other social media networks about block speed, and there's conversations about which blockchain they should use and how fast it is and what the hash rate is. And a lot of people don't really care about this because the user base is just people that are using Web2 applications. So what do you think we need to do to create that mainstream adoption?
I couldn't agree more with your analogy. I remember when I was back in my college dorm back in the 90s and I was in Web 1 land, how clunky it was to manually log on to your server. And all of a sudden you wake up one day and then you don't have to do that anymore. And Google's there on your desktop and you're like, wow. User experience is a huge issue that we need to solve across the stack. I am encouraged by some of the investment that we're seeing in infrastructure. But to your point, nobody should care about which chain I'm on ultimately. I think with some of the cross-chain interoperability solutions we're seeing, you could see the chains start competing. What are they going to compete on? Fees. They're going to compete on TPS and security. And I think it's going to be very healthy as the chains start competing in this space. And then also, the user experience needs to improve dramatically. We are seeing a number of Web2 developers coming into the space. I think they understand user experience. And I'm pretty encouraged to see what the next couple of years bring.
Are you seeing any of the enormous Web2 businesses really start to invest in this space? So I look at some of the cloud computing companies, from companies like Oracle to Amazon to Google. There are so many more. But are these huge businesses starting to innovate in this space, or are they still seeing it as a bit of a threat?
I think the answer is both. Many of them are trying to pivot and embrace Web3 branding, Web3 capabilities, but in their own kind of centralized way. There's also a massive fight for the soul of gaming right now, right? And there's been a pretty big pushback within gaming communities against the NFT Web3 space. I do think that over time, companies are going to have to adapt, I think, or they're going to be challenged and disrupted. So we'll see what happens, especially as that user interface improves. But most of the major Web 2 companies, do have initiatives that do bring in elements of Web 3, and I'm hearing a number of different initiatives that they're working through right now. So time will tell. But my sense is that if you don't adapt to rapidly changing technology in your technology company, be prepared to be disrupted.
In the current bear market, the retail investor market, which is probably a lot of our listeners, are a little bit down in the dumps at the minute. But when I talk to people like you tell me about all these incredible things that are happening in this space, the amount of stuff that's being built. From an investment perspective, during this bear market, has there been any change of sentiment from like traditional investors? So are they less inclined to invest in this space because of things like your Terra Lunas and your Three Arrows, etc., or is there more appetite, or is it kind of like a status quo?
We think about some of the bigger themes, and I think the bear market times are great for building. And as we come out of these bear markets, you're going to see a lot of promise in the space. And I guess it comes across pretty obvious, but I'm very optimistic about the future. I think the biggest difference going forward is you're going to see a much, much bigger adoption from the institutions. And that's going to drive demand, right? And so where some retail folks may have pulled back a little bit, I do think that demand is going to be offset and then some by institutional interest, because we're seeing it grow every single day. I mean, look at that BlackRock announcement. Having access to $20 trillion of assets under management, that's a lot of money, and BlackRock doesn't build those types of solutions without demand from the $20 trillion in managers that they support via Aladdin.
Yeah, I think that's massive validation for this space, even though a lot of the Bitcoin and crypto purists kind of felt that BlackRock being involved was not the best thing for the space. I can hold both views in my mind and appreciate both sides of that perspective, but I think people are deluded if they think that we don't want institutions in this space, because I think as soon as we get things like pension, I mean, for me, like Bitcoin in a pension is like the most obvious thing, because they have a much longer time horizon.
That's right.
I don't know any other asset class in the world that could be a better option to go in that. Like, it just seems so obvious to me. So we're super excited, and every time we speak to people that are building in this space, we're re-enthused by it. So is there anything else that you think we could cover off today that I haven't asked you, or anything else that you think our listeners should know about at all?
No, if anyone is ever looking to connect, I'm on Twitter at PerkinsCR97. Always interested in speaking with entrepreneurs who are building something special, and hope to keep the dialogue going.
Yeah, fantastic. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us, and hopefully we can get you guys back on the show in the near future. You can tell us a little bit more about what's going on at Coinfund. But Chris, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really insightful and a great pleasure to talk to you.
It was an honor, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. It would mean the world to us if you could leave a review wherever you're listening. This really does help and allows other people to find us online. You can keep up to date with new releases of the podcast by subscribing and following us on Twitter or Instagram for the latest crypto-related news. Information provided by Crypto Pulse via this podcast, website, social media channels, and any other medium does not constitute financial advice, investment recommendations, or any other type of advice whatsoever. The Crypto Pulse team are not professional financial advisors. Trading and purchasing cryptocurrencies do carry risks, and anybody wishing to partake in such activities should seek professional advice.